Alexander Mercer hadn't touched another human being in 3 years, not since the buyout that made him a billionaire and the brother he'd left behind. Now, surrounded by Manhattan's unforgiving rush, he pauses, something he never does, to help an elderly woman cross Fifth Avenue. Her weathered hands grip his tailored sleeve with surprising strength. When they reach the sidewalk, a small boy emerges from behind her coat, no more than 7, with curious eyes that mirror someone Alexander once knew. The child's school name tag catches the morning light. Ethan Mercer. The surname hits Alexander like a physical blow. His brother Thomas, whom he'd abandoned, whom he'd heard had died, had a son. Could this child truly be his nephew? And this woman the family he never knew existed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 68th floor of Mercer Tower offered a view of Manhattan that Alexander had once found breathtaking. Now it merely served as the backdrop to another day of acquisition meetings and quarterly projections. The glass-walled office, all steel, glass, and monochromatic furnishings, reflected the empire he had built, impressive, transparent in its ambition, and utterly cold. "Mr. Mercer, your 9 o'clock is waiting." Caroline stood at the doorway, tablet in hand, perfectly coiffed as always. 8 years as his executive assistant had taught her to read his moods. "Are you feeling all right? You've been staring out that window for 15 minutes. Alexander adjusted his tie, a gesture that had become a habit when he needed to recalibrate. "I'm fine, just thinking about the Jensen acquisition." It was a lie, and Caroline knew it. What he couldn't say was that he'd been replaying that moment. On Fifth Avenue, the boy's name tag, those familiar eyes. "The board is concerned about the valuation," Caroline continued, professional as ever. "Davis thinks we're overpaying by 20 million. "Davis always thinks we're overpaying," Alexander replied, reaching for his suit jacket. "That's why he has a 7-figure salary, and I have 10. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 executives in tailored suits, all waiting for his decision. This was where Alexander felt most comfortable, in control, decisive, untouchable. He'd built Mercer Technologies from a small software company he'd started with Thomas into a tech conglomerate valued at $11 billion. The cost had been his only family relationship, but he'd made peace with that, or so he'd thought. "Let's cut to the chase," Alexander began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Jensen Tech has the patents we need. Their team is brilliant but underfunded. We buy them, integrate their AI platform, and corner the market before Google even realizes." What happened? As the discussion flowed around him, Alexander found his thoughts drifting again. Thomas had opposed the first acquisition 8 years ago. "We built this to create something meaningful, Alex, not to become corporate raiders," he'd said. The argument had escalated until Thomas had walked away, selling his shares to Alexander for a fraction of their worth, cutting all ties. The last Alexander had heard 3 years ago, Thomas had died suddenly. "Heart attack," someone had said. He'd sent flowers but hadn't attended the funeral. Too many bridges burned. "Mr. Mercer, your thoughts on the counteroffer?" Davis's voice pulled him back. "Accept it," Alexander said abruptly. "Let's move on." Eyebrows raised around the table. Alexander Mercer never accepted counteroffers. After the meeting, he retreated to his office, locking the door, something he never did. He opened his laptop and typed "Thomas Mercer death" into the search bar. Articles about a small tech company's closure, a brief obituary, nothing about a son. He hesitated, then typed "Ethan Mercer." Nothing relevant. The intercom buzzed. "Your lunch meeting with the Japanese investors is in 20 minutes, Caroline reminded him. Alexander stared at his reflection in the black computer screen. When had the lines around his eyes deepened? When had success started to look so much like isolation? He reached for his phone, scrolling to a contact he hadn't used in years. Jack Winters, a former college roommate who'd become a private investigator. The kind of person who could find information about an elderly woman and a boy named Ethan Mercer without asking too many questions. His finger hovered over the call button. This was foolish. A coincidence, perhaps. Many people shared the Mercer surname. There was no reason to believe that child was his nephew, and yet those eyes... Alexander pressed call. As the phone rang, he glanced at the single personal item in his otherwise sterile office, a small framed photo face down in his desk drawer. He'd hidden it years ago, but never could bring himself to throw it away. Two young men in graduation caps, arms around each other's shoulders. Brothers with the world at their feet. "Jack, it's Alexander Mercer. I need your help finding someone." Jack Winter's report arrived by encrypted email the next morning. Alexander opened it with fingers that betrayed an unusual tremor, a physical manifestation of an emotion he hadn't felt in years, anticipation mixed with dread. The information was sparse, but definitive. Thomas Mercer had indeed died 2 years ago. Not from a heart attack as Alexander had been told, but from aggressive pancreatic cancer. He had left behind a son, Ethan Thomas Mercer, now 7 years old, and no wife. The boy's mother, Rebecca, had passed away in childbirth. Ethan was in the custody of his maternal grandmother, Martha Wilson, age 71. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Alexander leaned back in his chair, processing the information. His brother had been a father, and now that father was gone, leaving a boy to be raised by an elderly grandmother. A boy who should have known his uncle had his uncle not been so consumed with ambition. He opened his desk drawer and lifted the face-down photo frame he'd hidden away years ago. Their graduation day, Thomas, grinning broadly, arms slung over Alexander's shoulders. Thomas had graduated with honors in computer science, Alexander with a double major in business and economics. Within 3 years, they'd founded Mercer Technologies in their parents' garage. "We're going to change the world, Alex," Thomas had said. "Not just make money, make a difference." Alexander traced his finger over his brother's face. When had that idealistic vision splintered? When had their paths diverged so dramatically? He remembered the final board meeting before their split, Thomas passionately arguing against acquisition of their smaller competitor. "We're becoming exactly what we set out to disrupt," he'd said. Alexander had called him naive, too idealistic, for the cutthroat tech world. Words had been exchanged that couldn't be taken back. The intercom buzzed, pulling him from the memory. "The development team is waiting in conference room B," Caroline reminded him. "Cancel it," Alexander said, "and clear my afternoon." "Sir?" Caroline rarely questioned his decisions, but this was unprecedented. "Family emergency," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. 2 hours later, Alexander sat in his parked Aston Martin across from a nondescript apartment building in Queens. Children played in a small fenced area beside the entrance, a far cry from the private school he had assumed his brother's son would attend. He checked the address again. This was it as he watched a yellow school bus pulled up. Several children spilled out, including a small boy in a navy blue uniform. Ethan. He was even more the image of Thomas than Alexander had realized during their brief encounter. The same serious expression, the same way of tilting his head slightly. As he listened to something the crossing guard said, an elderly woman waited at the entrance, Martha Wilson. She bent to hug her grandson, took his backpack, and led him inside. Their interaction spoke of routine, of security despite modest circumstances. Alexander's phone vibrated with notifications, emails requiring immediate attention. The Jensen deal finalizing, market fluctuations affecting their Asian subsidiaries, the problems of a billionaire. He started the engine, but couldn't bring himself to drive away. What was he doing here? What did he hope to accomplish? Thomas was gone. No apology could reach him now, and this boy, this nephew, had no idea who Alexander was. Perhaps it was better that way, and yet Something held him there, watching the apartment building as dusk fell. The lights came on in what he assumed was their unit. The simple domesticity of it struck him with unexpected force. Before he could reconsider, Alexander reached for his phone again. "Jack, I need more information," he said when the investigator answered. "Daily routines, school information, everything. And I need to know if Thomas left anything behind. Letters, journals, anything that mentions me." The third time Alexander happened to be at Cunningham Park, when Martha brought Ethan to play, was the day he finally spoke to them. He'd spent the past week learning their routines, Ethan's school schedule, Martha's regular walks, their Saturday afternoon visits to this particular playground. Each time, he'd sat on the same bench, pretending to read financial reports while watching his nephew climb and laugh with other children. Today, he'd stopped at a bookstore on the way. On the shelf near the register, a colorful hardcover had caught his eye. The Boy Who Built Rockets. The cashier had smiled as she wrapped it. "For your son?" she'd asked. Alexander had only nodded, not trusting himself to correct her. Now, the gift-wrapped book sat beside him on the bench, a prop in a play he hadn't fully scripted. Martha sat on a bench 30 feet away, knitting, while keeping a watchful eye on Ethan. The boy was attempting to cross the monkey bars, his face a study in determination. When he reached the middle and his grip faltered, Alexander found himself half rising before Martha called out encouragement. "You've got it, Ethan, just 2 more." The boy made it across and pumped his fist in victory. "Grandma, did you see?" "I did. Wonderful job." Martha's pride was evident in her voice. Watching their interaction, Alexander felt like an intruder. What right did he have to insert himself into their lives? He should leave, forget this ill-conceived plan, return to the world he understood. But then Ethan fell. A minor tumble from the bottom of the slide. Before Alexander could think, he was on his feet, moving toward the boy who was already brushing dirt from his knees. "Are you all right?" Alexander asked, kneeling to the child's level. Ethan looked up, surprised. "I'm okay. I've fallen worse than that before." The directness in his gaze was pure Thomas. Alexander felt a constriction in his chest. "Ethan, what have I told you about talking to strangers?" Martha approached, her expression concerned. "It's all right," Alexander said, standing. "I just wanted to make sure he wasn't hurt." Martha assessed him carefully, noting his expensive coat and shoes. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Mercer," he said, then immediately regretted it. Alexander. If Martha recognized the name, she didn't show it. "Well, thank you, Mr. Alexander. Ethan is quite resilient." "I can do a cartwheel," Ethan announced. "Want to see?" Before either adult could respond, the boy was demonstrating his skill, somewhat lopsided, but enthusiastic. Alexander found himself smiling genuinely. "Very impressive. My dad taught me," Ethan said proudly, "before he went to heaven." The statement, delivered with childish frankness, struck Alexander speechless. Martha's expression softened. "Ethan's father passed away 2 years ago. He still talks about him all the time." "I'm sorry for your loss," Alexander managed. "Thank you." Martha studied him. "You remind me of someone, actually. Something about your eyes." Alexander felt a flutter of panic. "I have one of those faces, I suppose." An awkward silence fell. Alexander noticed the wrapped book still on the bench. "Actually," he said, retrieving it, "I bought this for my nephew, but he already has it. I was going to return it, but perhaps Ethan might enjoy it." Martha frowned slightly at the unexpected gift from a stranger, but Ethan's eyes lit up. "Can I, Grandma, please?" Martha hesitated. "That's very generous, but we couldn't possibly—" "I insist," Alexander said. "It would be a shame to waste it." Reluctantly, Martha allowed Ethan to accept the gift. The boy tore open the wrapping paper with unrestrained excitement. "Rockets! Grandma, look! It's about a boy who builds rockets." "What do you say, Ethan?" Martha prompted. "Thank you, Mr. Alexander." Ethan clutched the book to his chest. "You're welcome," Alexander replied, shocked by the warmth that spread through. him at the boy's delight. As they prepared to leave, Martha turned to him. "We come here most Saturdays, Mr. Alexander. Perhaps we'll see you again." It was an invitation, cautious but real. Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched them walk away, Ethan already paging through his new book, chattering excitedly. The boy looked back once and waved. Alexander waved back, feeling something shift inside him, something long dormant, awakening. Alexander stood outside apartment 4B, a bottle of wine in one hand and a gourmet chocolate cake in the other. 3 more park encounters had led to this moment, Martha's dinner invitation. "Nothing fancy," she'd insisted. "Just my lasagna. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about you since you gave him that book." He hadn't been inside a home like this in decades. His childhood home had been similar, modest but dignified, before his parents' accident had left him and Thomas to navigate the world alone. Alexander had responded by building walls, literal and figurative. His penthouse occupied an entire floor of an exclusive Manhattan building, designed by a renowned architect to showcase wealth rather than comfort. He knocked, aware of the incongruity of his bespoke suit in this working-class hallway. The door opened to Ethan's beaming face. "Mr. Alexander, you came. Grandma, he's here." The apartment was small but immaculate. Family photos covered the walls, knitted Afghans draped over worn furniture. The scent of tomato sauce and herbs filled the air. It was nothing like Alexander's sterile, magazine-worthy residence, yet something about it tugged at him. This was a home. "Just in time," Martha called from the kitchen. "Ethan, show Mr. Alexander where to put his coat." Alexander handed the wine and cake to Ethan, who accepted them with exaggerated care. "Grandma, he brought fancy things," Martha emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. "You didn't need to bring anything." "Where I come from, guests don't arrive empty-handed," Alexander replied. "And where is that, exactly?" Martha asked, her gaze direct. "You've been very mysterious about yourself, Mr. Alexander." Before he could formulate a response, Ethan tugged at his sleeve. "Want to see my rockets? I built them from the book you gave me." Grateful for the interruption, Alexander followed Ethan to a small bedroom. Paper rockets of various designs hung from the ceiling on strings. A collection of model aircraft lined a shelf. "My dad loved planes and rockets," Ethan explained seriously. "He was going to be an astronaut, but then he got too sick." Alexander's throat tightened. Thomas, an astronaut, their childhood dream. "These are impressive," he managed. "Dinner's ready," Martha called. The table was set simply but with evident care. Martha served her lasagna with a quiet pride. "This is delicious," Alexander said after his first bite, genuinely impressed. "Grandma makes the best lasagna in the whole world," Ethan declared. "It was Thomas's favorite," Martha said. "Ethan's father," she added, though Alexander already knew. "You must miss him very much," Alexander said carefully. Martha's eyes grew distant. "Every day, he was like a son to me, even before he married. My Rebecca, such a gentle soul. Brilliant with computers, but he never cared about money. Just wanted to create things that helped people." Each word was a knife twist. This was the brother Alexander had lost, not to death, but to his own ambition, years before cancer had taken Thomas physically. He talked about his brother sometimes. Martha continued, watching Alexander's reaction. They started a company together, but had a falling out. Thomas never said much about it, just that they had different visions. "His brother became very successful, I understand." Alexander stared at his plate. "And Thomas, was he happy?" "He had his struggles. The cancer took him quickly, but he faced it with grace. His main concern was always Ethan. The boy, oblivious to the undercurrents, was cutting his lasagna into precise squares. "Dad made me promise to be brave and take care of Grandma," he said, matter-of-factly, "and to keep building rockets." After dinner, while Martha served the cake, Ethan brought out a math worksheet. "Can you help me? Grandma tries, but she says math has changed since her day." Alexander found himself at the small kitchen table, explaining multiplication to his nephew, while Martha washed dishes. The domesticity of the scene was foreign to him, yet oddly comfortable. As he prepared to leave, Martha handed him a container of leftover lasagna. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Alexander. Ethan enjoys your company." "The pleasure was mine," Alexander replied, meaning it more than he had expected to. "Perhaps you'll join us again?" she suggested. Alexander nodded, realizing with surprise that he wanted nothing more. 2 weeks and 3 more dinners later, Alexander found himself helping Ethan build a more complex rocket model on a Sunday afternoon. These visits had become the center of his existence, displacing board meetings and acquisition strategies in his thoughts. He'd begun delegating more to his executive team, shocking Caroline with his sudden interest in personal time. "Pass me the blue paint," Ethan requested, his small face a mask of concentration. Martha entered from the kitchen with a tray of lemonade. "You two have been at it for hours. Mr. Alexander says details matter," Ethan reported seriously. "That's why he's rich." Alexander froze. He'd been careful not to discuss his wealth or position. Martha gave him a long look. "Rich, is he? Interesting." "I just meant successful," Alexander amended awkwardly. "Grandma, can I show Mr. Alexander Dad's special box?" Ethan asked suddenly. Martha hesitated. "Are you sure, sweetheart? That's very personal. Dad would want him to see," Ethan insisted with childish certainty. Martha nodded slowly. "All right, it's in my closet, top shelf." While Ethan retrieved the box, Martha sat across from Alexander. "He's becoming attached to you," she said quietly. "I hope you understand what that means." The implied warning was clear. Don't disappear from his life. "I'm not going anywhere," Alexander replied, surprised by his own certainty. Ethan returned with a wooden box, lovingly crafted. "Dad made this. He was good at making things." Inside were Thomas's treasures, photographs, handwritten notes, his wedding ring, and beneath these, a leather-bound journal. "He wrote in this when he was sick," Ethan explained. "He said someday when I'm older it would help me understand things." Martha gently took the journal. "Perhaps Mr. Alexander would like to see some of your father's photographs first." Alexander nodded, grateful for her sensitivity. Ethan proudly showed him pictures of Thomas. Thomas on his wedding day, Thomas holding infant Ethan, Thomas thin and pale, but smiling in a hospital bed. Each image was a glimpse of the life his brother had lived without him. The happiness Alexander had assumed was impossible in Thomas's small existence was evident in every photograph. "He was a wonderful father," Martha said softly. "I wish I had known him," Alexander said, the half-truth sticking in his throat. Martha studied him, then made a decision. "Ethan, why don't you go organize your rocket collection while I show Mr. Alexander your father's journal?" When Ethan had left, Martha handed Alexander the leather-bound book. "Thomas wrote this during his last months. I've never shown it to anyone, but something tells me you should see it." Alexander accepted it with trembling hands. "Why would you share something so personal with me?" "Because Ethan trusts you," she replied simply, "and because I think you might need it." He opened to a random page, and Thomas's familiar handwriting leapt out at him. "I dreamt of Alex last night. We were back in the garage, working on our first program, laughing about bugs in the code. I miss who we were then, before money and success changed everything. I don't hate him for what happened with the company. I understand his drive better. Now that I'm facing the end, we all leave legacies in different ways. Mine will be Ethan, Alex's will be the company. I just wish he could see that success without connection is an empty victory." Alexander closed the journal, unable to continue. When he looked up, Martha was watching him intently. "You knew," he whispered. "Not at first," she admitted. "But there were clues. Your reaction when Ethan first mentioned his father, the way you asked about Thomas, and there's something in your eyes, the same shape as his." She reached for a framed photo on the side table and handed it to him. It showed Thomas, With a tall younger man, Alexander himself from years ago. He kept this on his desk until the day he died, Martha said. I recognized you the second time we met at the park, but I wanted to understand why you were hiding your identity. I didn't know how to tell you, Alexander said. I didn't even know he had a son until I saw Ethan's name tag that day. Why? Are you here now, Alexander Mercer? Martha asked, her voice hard with sudden emotion. What do you want from us? Before he could answer, Ethan bounded back into the room. Grandma, can Mr. Alexander stay for dinner again? The innocent question hung in the air between them, the boy unaware of the revelation that had just occurred. That, Alexander said quietly to Martha, is entirely up to your grandmother. Martha sent Ethan to play in his room, her expression tight with controlled anger. He thinks you're his friend, she said once they were alone. A nice man who enjoys building rockets with him, not the uncle who abandoned his father. Alexander felt each word like a physical blow. I didn't know. Thomas was sick. If I had— What? Martha interrupted. You would have reconciled, helped with the medical bills. Been there for your brother when he was dying. Her voice trembled. Thomas waited for you. Even after everything, he believed you would come when you heard he was ill. Alexander's chest constricted. I was told it was a heart attack. Sudden. I didn't know until— He gestured helplessly at the journal. Martha's eyes widened slightly. No one told you? Thomas was sick for 11 months. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We hadn't spoken in years, Alexander admitted. The company executives must have filtered the information. The company, Martha repeated bitterly. Always the company. She walked to a small desk in the corner and pulled out a folder. From it, she extracted a document and thrust it at Alexander. Do you recognize this? It was the buyout contract from 8 years ago, the legal mechanism that had severed their partnership and ultimately their brotherhood. Alexander's signature bold at the bottom, Thomas's a faded scrawl. Thomas kept this, she said, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of what matters. Do you know what he did after you forced him out? Alexander shook his head, ashamed. He started a small educational software company, designed programs to help children with learning disabilities, made enough to live comfortably, but never wealthy. When Ethan was born, he worked from home to be with him. After Rebecca died, he was both mother and father. Each word painted a picture of the brother Alexander had lost, not just to death, but to his own ambition years before. I didn't force Thomas out, Alexander said quietly. He chose to leave. After you changed the company's direction without consulting him, Martha countered. After you brought in venture capitalists who pushed for aggressive growth over the community focus Thomas wanted. The memories flooded back, heated arguments in the boardroom, Thomas's passion for their original vision, Alexander's cold business logic. We were going to fail if we stayed small, Alexander insisted. The market was changing. And now you're a billionaire, Martha said flatly. Congratulations. The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken grief. Why did you come back now? Martha finally asked. What do you want from Ethan? Alexander struggled to articulate feelings he barely understood himself. When I saw him that day, when I realized who he was, it was like seeing Thomas again, a second chance perhaps. A second chance, Martha repeated. Thomas doesn't get one, and Ethan isn't a replacement for your brother. I know that, Alexander said. I want to know him, to be part of his life. Why should I allow that? Martha challenged. You walked away from Thomas. What's to stop you from walking away from Ethan when being an uncle becomes inconvenient for your business? Empire? Alexander had no answer. From the hallway came the sound of a small sniffle. They both turned to see Ethan standing there, eyes wide and wet. You're my uncle? He asked Alexander. My dad's brother? Alexander nodded slowly. Yes, Ethan, I am. Why didn't you tell me? The boy's voice was small, confused. Before Alexander could respond, Martha intervened. Mr. Alexander was just leaving, Ethan. But the rocket, Ethan protested, is finished for today, Martha said firmly. Say goodbye. Ethan looked between them, sensing the tension. Will you come back? He asked Alexander. Martha answered for him. I think it's best if Mr. Alexander doesn't visit any more. But his family, Ethan cried. Dad always said family is the most important thing. The irony of his words wasn't lost on either adult. Martha's expression softened slightly at her grandson's distress, but her resolve remained firm. I think you should go, she told Alexander quietly. He nodded, gathering his coat. At the door he paused. I am truly sorry, Martha, for everything. I'm not the one you need to apologize to, she replied, and it's too late for Thomas to hear it. As the door closed behind him, Alexander heard Ethan's tearful questions begin. A trust fund? Caroline's eyebrows rose as she reviewed the documents Alexander had placed on her desk. For your nephew? 3 days had passed since Martha had asked him to leave. 3 sleepless nights spent rereading Thomas's journal, each entry revealing a brother he had never truly known, and now never could. 5 million initially, with additional distributions at 18, 25 and 30, Alexander confirmed, plus a separate account for educational expenses, accessible immediately. Caroline studied her boss carefully. In 8 years, she had never seen him so agitated, pacing his office, cancelling meetings, working through the night on personal matters rather than acquisitions. You never mentioned having a nephew, she said carefully. I didn't know about him until recently. Alexander straightened a paperclip that had been perfectly straight already. His father, my brother, passed away 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Caroline said, genuinely surprised. I didn't realize you had a brother. The simple statement underscored Alexander's compartmentalized existence. How had he become someone whose closest associate knew nothing of his family? Thomas. And we were estranged, he admitted. The boy is being raised by his maternal grandmother. She's elderly, living on a fixed income. And this trust is your way of helping them, Caroline concluded. It's the least I can do. Caroline tapped the papers thoughtfully. Have you considered that money might not be what they need most from you? Alexander stiffened. Money is what I have to give. Is it? She challenged gently. Then, seeing his expression close, she reverted to professionalism. I'll have legal prepare these for signature immediately. Later that day, Alexander sat in his attorney's office as the final documents were prepared. Lawrence Harrington had handled his legal affairs for 15 years, ever since Mercer Technologies had outgrown their initial legal team. This is quite generous, Harrington observed, though a direct guardianship arrangement might give you more control over the child's upbringing. Alexander looked up sharply. I'm not seeking custody. I just want to ensure his financial security. Of course, Harrington backpedaled. I merely thought, given your resources, you might want a more direct influence. The grandmother is his guardian. I'm respecting that. The attorney nodded, but his expression suggested he found Alexander's restraint puzzling. In their world, wealth typically translated to control. That evening, Alexander personally delivered the trust documents to Martha's apartment. She answered the door with wary eyes. May I come in? He asked. Ethan's asleep, she replied, not moving from the doorway. I'm here to see you, actually. He held out the folder. I've established a trust fund for Ethan. Education, healthcare, housing, everything he'll need through adulthood. Martha didn't reach for the documents. You think money will fix this? Alexander sighed. No, but it's something I can do. Please, Martha. Reluctantly, she allowed him inside and accepted the folder. As she reviewed the papers, her expression remained unreadable. $5 million, she finally said. That's your price for abandoning your brother? The accusation stung. It's not about price. It's about making sure Ethan has opportunities. He has opportunities, Martha countered. What he needs is Family who won't disappear when things get difficult. I'm trying to do the right thing, Alexander insisted. By throwing money at us from a distance? Martha closed the folder. Thomas refused your money when he was dying. He said some things can't be bought. Alexander hadn't known this. Another revelation that twisted inside him. What would you have? Me do? He asked, genuine desperation in his voice. Be present, Martha said simply. If you want to be in Ethan's life, be in his life. Not with trust funds and lawyers, but with time and care. That is, if you're capable of it. Her doubt was justified. Alexander had spent decades prioritizing business over personal connections. The thought of emotional investment terrified him more than any market downturn. Ethan asks about you, Martha admitted reluctantly. He wants to know about his father's brother. Hope flickered. What have you told him? The truth. That you and his father loved each other once, but grew apart. That people make mistakes. Alexander swallowed hard. Could I see him again? Martha studied him for a long moment. The science fair is next week. He's building a model solar system. His partner dropped out, and he's struggling to finish alone. It was a test, Alexander realized. An opportunity to prove he could be more than a checkbook. No lawyers, Martha added, tapping the trust fund documents. No money discussions with him, just be his uncle, if that's what you truly want. It is, Alexander said, meaning it more than he'd expected to. Thursday after school, then, Martha said, showing him to the door. And, Alexander, if you disappoint him again, that's it. I won't give you another chance to break his heart. The door closed firmly behind him. Alexander stood in the hallway. The trust fund documents returned to him unsigned. For the first time in his business career, he had failed to close a deal, and felt like he might have won something more valuable instead. Alexander arrived at the apartment precisely at 4 on Thursday, having rescheduled a meeting with Japanese investors. Caroline had stared at him in disbelief when he'd calmly prioritized family obligations over a potential 8-figure deal. Ethan opened the door, his initial shyness quickly dissolving into excitement. "Uncle Alexander! You came!" The title, Uncle, hit Alexander with unexpected force. He'd been Mr. Alexander, then the man who'd lied, and now suddenly family. "I said I would," Alexander replied, entering the small apartment. Our finished planets were scattered across the living room floor, some papier-mâché, others foam balls painted in various stages of completion. Martha emerged from the kitchen, her expression guarded but civil. "Ethan, show your uncle what you've done so far." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of paint, glue, and astronomy facts. Alexander found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, his bespoke suit collecting smudges of blue and red paint, as Ethan explained his vision. For the solar system. "Dad loved space," Ethan said, as they attached Neptune to its wire support. "He said looking at stars makes our problems seem smaller." Alexander remembered summer nights on their parents' roof, he and Thomas with a telescope their father had bought second-hand, Thomas pointing out constellations, Alexander calculating the distances between stars. "Your father was right," Alexander said softly. "We used to stargaze together when we were boys." Ethan looked up, eyes bright with interest. "Really? What else did you do together?" The question opened a flood of memories Alexander had long suppressed. "We built a treehouse once. Your father designed it. He was always the creative one. I managed the budget, counting nails and measuring boards." "Was he funny, my dad?" "The funniest," Alexander confirmed, smiling at the memory. "He once replaced all my bookmarks with strips of bacon." Ethan giggled. "That's silly." It was. And it ruined perfectly good books. But Alexander was laughing too. Martha, who had been quietly observing from the kitchen doorway, brought them sandwiches and lemonade. Alexander noticed her expression had softened slightly. "The Saturn rings aren't working," Ethan complained, showing Alexander his attempt to create the planet's distinctive feature. Alexander studied the cardboard circles. "I think we need something thinner," May I? He reached for his wallet and extracted a business card. We can trace this to get the perfect circle, then cut it from this lighter material. Together, they problem-solved each planet's unique challenges. Alexander found himself drawing on skills he hadn't used since college. Practical creativity rather than financial strategy. When Ethan struggled with the relative distances between planets, Alexander helped him create a scale model that was both accurate and visually appealing. "You're good at this," Martha commented, when Ethan stepped away to wash paint from his hands. "Surprised?" Alexander asked. "A little," she admitted. "Thomas always said you were brilliant with systems and numbers. I just didn't expect the CEO to get paint on his hands," Alexander finished, glancing ruefully at his stained cuffs. "To be patient with a child," Martha corrected. "To listen to him, to care about getting Neptune the right shade of blue." Alexander considered this. "I didn't expect it either." When the model was finally complete, Ethan insisted on hanging each planet from the ceiling of his bedroom, creating a miniature universe above his bed. Alexander held the ladder while Ethan carefully positioned each celestial body. "Dad would have loved this," Ethan said as they admired their work. "Yes," Alexander agreed, throat tight, "he would have." As Alexander prepared to leave, Ethan asked suddenly, "Will you come to the science fair? It's next Friday at school." Alexander hesitated, mentally reviewing his schedule. Board meetings, quarterly projections, the Hong Kong expansion. Martha watched him, her expression making it clear this was another test. "I'll be there," Alexander promised, meeting her gaze steadily. "Front row?" "Good," Ethan said, giving him an impulsive hug. "Because I'm going to win first place." The small arms around his waist left Alexander momentarily speechless. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had hugged him. Walking to his car, Alexander pulled out his phone and called Caroline. "Clear my schedule for next Friday," he instructed. "The entire day." "The board meeting," she began, "can be rescheduled," he interrupted. "This is non-negotiable, Caroline. Family comes first." He hung up, the words echoing in his mind. Family comes first. Thomas's mantra, not his. Yet somehow, it felt right. The science fair was 3 days away when Alexander's carefully constructed worlds collided. He was reviewing Ethan's presentation notes over lunch, a new routine that involved actual lunch breaks away from his office, when Caroline burst in without knocking, her typically composed demeanor visibly shaken. "Vortex Tech is making a move," she announced, placing a tablet in front of him. "They've acquired 15% of our shares on the open market in the last 48 hours. Alexander scanned the report, his relaxed posture instantly transforming. Vortex was their largest competitor, known for aggressive takeovers and ruthless post-acquisition layoffs. "How did we miss this?" he demanded. "They used shell companies. By the time we connected the purchases, they'd already secured a significant position." Caroline's voice was tight. "Their CEO is requesting a meeting tomorrow night." "Decline," Alexander said automatically. "We need time to—" "They're threatening to go public with the offer if you refuse. The market would react poorly." Alexander understood the implication. Stock volatility, panicked shareholders, potential loss of control of the company he and Thomas had built from nothing. "Schedule the meeting," he conceded, "and get the executive team in the conference room in 30 minutes. As Caroline left, Alexander glanced down at Ethan's science notes, still spread across his desk. The boy had written "Planets" by Ethan Mercer and Uncle Alexander across the top in careful block letters. Alexander had felt an unexpected pride seeing their names together. The next 36 hours dissolved into crisis management. Alexander worked through the night, strategizing with his executive team and lawyers. By Thursday evening, it was clear the meeting with Vortex's CEO would be critical and contentious. "They've scheduled it for 7 tomorrow night," Caroline informed him as he reviewed defense strategies. "I've arranged for legal to—" Alexander looked up sharply. "Tomorrow night? That won't work. Reschedule for Saturday." Caroline blinked in confusion. They won't agree to that. Their CEO is flying in specifically for this meeting. I have a prior commitment, Alexander said firmly. A prior... Caroline stared at him. Alexander, this is a hostile takeover attempt. Whatever dinner reservation. Or it's my nephew's science fair, he interrupted. I promised I'd be there. A tense silence filled the office. In 8 years, Alexander had never prioritized a personal commitment over business, certainly not during a crisis. They'll take this as weakness, warned Davis, the CFO, who had been reviewing financials nearby. Vortex will see it as lack of commitment. Perhaps, Alexander acknowledged, but I made a promise. To a child, Davis scoffed. Children understand. When adults have important business, Alexander thought of Thomas, of missed birthdays and cancelled plans, always with the excuse of important business. Not this child, he said with quiet finality. Not this time. The team exchanged glances as Alexander turned back to the defensive strategies. We'll counter with a stock buyback, he continued, and approach the Anderson Group about a white knight position. The discussion resumed, but the undercurrent of shock remained. Alexander Mercer placing family above business? Unprecedented. That evening, Alexander called Martha to confirm his attendance at the science fair. The conversation was brief, but warm, a tentative trust building between them. As he hung up, his phone immediately rang again. Vortex's CEO calling directly. Mercer, the voice began without preamble, my team tells me you're refusing to meet tomorrow. I have a family commitment, Alexander replied evenly. A short laugh. Family? Since when does the infamous Alexander Mercer have family concerns? The question stung precisely because it reflected the reputation Alexander had cultivated, the ruthless businessman, unencumbered by personal attachments. Things change, he said simply. Not in my experience, came the reply. Look, I respect your attempt at negotiation tactics, but we both know what matters in this business. I'm offering to meet personally before we take this public. Friday night is your only option. Alexander thought of Ethan's face when he'd promised to attend, of Martha's watchful eyes, of Thomas's journal entry about broken promises. For the first time in his career, the choice was clear. Then we'll have to meet in public, he said firmly. I'll see you at the press conference on Monday. He ended the call and turned to find Caroline standing in his office doorway, her expression a mix of confusion and something else, respect perhaps. You're really choosing a school science fair over the future of the company? She asked quietly. Alexander straightened a stack of papers on his desk. I'm choosing not to repeat my worst mistake, he corrected. Draft a press release about our confidence in our independent future. And Caroline, I'll need a ride to Queens tomorrow afternoon. The Aston Martin might be a bit conspicuous at an elementary school. The science fair had been a triumph. Ethan's solar system project won first place, his detailed knowledge of planetary facts impressing the judges. Alexander had sat in the front row as promised, ignoring the constant vibration of his phone as the vortex situation escalated. The pride on Ethan's face when he'd spotted his uncle in the audience had been worth every frantic message Alexander had ignored. 3 weeks later, the corporate crisis had been temporarily averted through a series of complex financial maneuvers that left Alexander's team exhausted but victorious. Vortex had retreated, though Alexander knew it was only a tactical withdrawal. Now he faced a different challenge. Ethan's 8th birthday party. Nothing extravagant, Martha had warned when Alexander offered to help. He's invited 6 friends from school. Simple games, cake, presents. That's all he needs. Alexander had nodded, though the concept of simple was increasingly foreign to him. His world was one of excess, private jets, rare wines, custom everything. The last birthday party he'd organized had been for a major client, featuring a renowned chef and a private performance by a Grammy-winning artist. The morning of the party, Alexander arrived at Martha's apartment with what he considered a restrained contribution, a modest stack of wrapped gifts, and a custom cake from Manhattan's most exclusive bakery. Martha eyed the delivery with skepticism. "That cake looks like it belongs at a wedding. It's chocolate inside," Alexander defended. "Every child likes chocolate." Martha sighed, but accepted the elaborate confection. "The rocket is a nice touch," she conceded, noting the detailed fondant. Spacecraft atop the cake. Ethan emerged from his bedroom in a NASA t-shirt, his excitement palpable. "Uncle Alexander, you came early." "I thought you might need help setting up," Alexander explained, ruffling the boy's hair, a gesture that was becoming natural after weeks of regular visits. Together they hung streamers and arranged party favors. Alexander found himself enjoying the simple preparations more than he'd expected. There was something satisfying about creating joy with paper decorations and balloons rather than corporate credit cards. When the first guests arrived, small boys in various states of energy and excitement, Alexander felt unexpectedly nervous. He was accustomed to commanding boardrooms, not navigating the social dynamics of 8-year-olds. "This is my Uncle Alexander," Ethan announced proudly to his friends. "He helped me with my solar system, and he knows everything about business." The introduction earned Alexander curious looks from the children and assessing glances from the few parents who stayed. He found himself engaged in awkward small talk about school fundraisers and local sports teams, topics that had never entered. His sphere of concern. "You must be the famous uncle," one mother said, extending her hand. "Ethan talks about you constantly. You work in technology, I understand?" "Something like that," Alexander replied vaguely, unused to downplaying his position. As the party progressed, Alexander observed Ethan with his friends. The easy laughter, the uncomplicated joy of Pin the Rocket on the Moon, and space-themed relay races. When had Alexander's own life become so devoid of simple pleasures? The gift opening revealed Alexander's misstep. While the other children had brought modestly wrapped action figures and space toys, Alexander's pile contained a professional-grade telescope, a signed first edition of a book on astronomy, and a custom-made astronaut flight suit. The extravagance created an awkward moment until Ethan, with a child's diplomacy, declared them all the best presents ever, and moved on to serving cake. Later, as Martha cleaned up wrapping paper, she commented quietly, "You don't need to buy his affection, you know." Alexander winced. "I just wanted to give him special things." "The most special thing you've given him is your time," Martha replied. "That telescope cost more than my car, but what Ethan will remember is you teaching him to find Jupiter through it." Alexander considered this as he watched Ethan demonstrating his new flight suit to the last remaining guest. "I'm still learning," he admitted. Martha's expression softened unexpectedly. "You're trying. That's more than I expected." As the final guests departed, Ethan approached Alexander with uncharacteristic shyness. "This was the best birthday ever," he said. "Even better than when Dad was here, except—" He stopped, looking guilty. "Except you wish your dad could have been here too," Alexander finished gently. Ethan nodded. "Is that bad to say?" "No," Alexander assured him, kneeling to eye level. "Your dad should be here, and I know he would be so proud of you." Ethan hugged him fiercely. "I'm glad you're here instead," he whispered. The words pierced Alexander's carefully constructed defenses. He wasn't a replacement for Thomas, could never be, but perhaps he could be something else, something meaningful in his own right as a... He prepared to leave. Alexander found himself lingering, reluctant to return to his empty penthouse. "Same time Tuesday?" Martha asked, referring to their now regular dinner. Alexander nodded, realizing with surprise that he was already looking forward to it. "I'll bring the ingredients for that pasta Ethan likes." "Not from that fancy Italian import store," Martha warned. "Regular grocery pasta is fine," Alexander smiled. "I'm learning." The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 6 months after Alexander had first helped an elderly woman cross Fifth Avenue. Martha was preparing dinner, the weekly ritual that had become the anchor of Alexander's formerly untethered life, when the mail carrier knocked, requiring a signature. "Registered letter from Goldstein and Associates," Martha murmured, examining the envelope with confusion. "I don't know any Goldstein." Alexander recognized the name immediately. "That's Thomas's old law firm." Martha opened it carefully, reading silently as Alexander helped Ethan with homework at the kitchen table. The boy had grown comfortable with their routine: Tuesday dinners, weekend outings, impromptu science lessons. Alexander had grown comfortable too, finding unexpected fulfillment in his role as uncle. "Martha?" Alexander prompted when he noticed her face had gone pale. "What is it?" She handed him the letter wordlessly, then sank into a chair. The document was formal, addressed to both Martha Wilson and Alexander Mercer. It explained that in accordance with the final wishes of Thomas Mercer, a sealed addendum to his will was to be opened on this date, precisely 2 years after his death, and delivered to both parties simultaneously. Alexander scanned the enclosed documents with growing disbelief. According to this previously unknown addition to Thomas's will, Thomas had maintained controlling interest in a subsidiary of Mercer Technologies, a small educational software division that Alexander had allowed him to retain after their split. The company, Ed Mercer, had grown modestly but steadily under Thomas's guidance. The will stipulated that this controlling interest would pass to Alexander rather than Ethan, with one critical condition: Alexander must assume joint guardianship of Ethan alongside Martha. "He can't be serious," Alexander whispered, looking up to meet Martha's stunned gaze. "Keep reading," she said tightly. The document continued to explain that if Alexander declined guardianship, the shares would be sold and the proceeds placed in trust for Ethan until his 25th birthday. If Martha refused to share guardianship with Alexander, the same provision applied. "This is Thomas's way of forcing us together," Martha said, her voice hollow. "His final attempt to reunite his fractured family." Alexander stared at the legal language, recognizing the elegant trap his brother had set. The same strategic brilliance that had made Thomas exceptional in business had been turned to personal matters in his final days. "Uncle Alexander," Ethan's voice broke through their shocked silence. "Is something wrong?" Martha composed herself quickly. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Adult business. Why don't you set the table?" When Ethan was out of earshot, Martha's calm facade crumbled. "He had no right," she hissed. "Thomas had no right to do this to us, to Ethan." He was trying to ensure Ethan had both family and financial security, Alexander reasoned, though he too felt manipulated. "By using his son as leverage," Martha's eyes flashed. "I've raised that boy since he was 5. I've been his only constant. And now I'm supposed to share custody with a man who didn't know he existed until 6 months ago." The words stung, but Alexander couldn't deny their truth. "The choice is still yours," he pointed out. "You can refuse and lose the financial security Thomas wanted for his son." Martha shook her head bitterly. "He knew I wouldn't do that. I could decline and still provide for Ethan," Alexander offered. "The trust fund offer still stands." "That's not what Thomas wanted." Martha's tone was final. "He wanted his son to have his family, all of it, the money and the people." The irony wasn't lost on Alexander. Thomas, who had walked away from millions on principle, had used those same millions to force a reconciliation from beyond the grave. "I need time to think," Martha said, rising abruptly. "Dinner is in the oven. I'm going to lie down." Left alone, Alexander studied the legal document more carefully. A note, handwritten by Thomas, was attached to the final page. "Alex, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found your way back to what matters. I forgive you for choosing the company over me. I hope you can forgive me for using the company to bring you back to family. Ethan needs you more than he needs the money. Be the brother to him that I always believed you could be to me." The words blurred as Alexander's eyes filled with unexpected tears. Thomas had orchestrated this final move not out of spite, but hope. Hope that Alexander could become the man Thomas had always believed he could be. Ethan returned, plates in hand. Where's Grandma? She needed to rest, Alexander replied, quickly composing himself. It seems your father left us a puzzle to solve. Dad was good at puzzles, Ethan said confidently. He always said every problem has a solution, if you're clever. Enough to find it. Alexander studied his nephew's trusting face. The boy had no idea that he himself was at the center of the most complex puzzle Thomas had ever designed. Your father, Alexander said quietly, was the cleverest man I ever knew. Lawrence Harrington's corner office overlooked Central Park, the view a calculated display of success and influence. Alexander sat across from his attorney, watching him review Thomas's will for the third time. It's airtight, Harrington concluded, setting down the document. Your brother consulted excellent estate attorneys. Can we challenge it? Alexander asked, though the question felt hollow. Harrington's eyebrow arched. You're asking if you can legally avoid becoming guardian to your nephew? I thought you'd been building a relationship with the boy. It's complicated, Alexander replied. Martha has been his sole guardian since Thomas died. She's resistant to sharing custody. Understandable, but legally irrelevant. The terms are clear: joint guardianship, or the company assets are liquidated. Harrington leaned forward. Those assets have appreciated considerably, by the way. Ed Mercer's educational software division has secured several major school district contracts. The sale proceeds would be substantial. Alexander waved away the financial consideration. This isn't about money. Then what is it about, Alexander? Harrington asked with unusual directness. You've spent months developing a relationship with this child. I'd have thought shared guardianship would be your goal. Not like this, Alexander admitted. Not forced through legal manipulation. Harrington chuckled dryly. You've built your fortune on strategic corporate maneuvers. Your brother simply applied those tactics to family matters. The observation stung with its accuracy. Thomas had outplayed him using his own methods. What if we petition for full custody? Alexander suggested, the idea forming as he spoke. Given my resources, I could provide advantages Martha cannot. Harrington nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking like yourself again. We could make a compelling case based on financial stability, educational opportunities, quality of living environment. As the attorney outlined aggressive legal strategies, Alexander felt a growing discomfort. This was his default approach, overwhelming opposition with superior resources. But the opposition in this case was an elderly woman who had lovingly raised his nephew through the loss of both parents. Draft the paperwork, Alexander instructed, his business instincts overriding his misgivings. But don't file anything. Yet, 2 days later, Alexander sat in Martha's small living room, custody documents in his briefcase. He'd come to discuss options rationally, to propose a compromise. Instead, he found Martha had retained counsel of her own, a community legal aid attorney whose shabby suit and earnest demeanor contrasted sharply with Harrington's polished expertise. Mrs. Wilson has been Ethan's primary caregiver for over 2 years, the young lawyer stated. She has provided stability and continuity during profound loss. Courts generally favor maintaining such arrangements. No one is disputing Mrs. Wilson's care, Alexander countered, but Ethan is my blood relative. I can offer resources and opportunities that would benefit him significantly. Money isn't everything, Mr. Mercer, the lawyer replied evenly. Exactly what I've been telling him, Martha interjected. Ethan needs stability, not luxury. The discussion deteriorated from there, legal arguments masking the real issue. Neither wanted to cede control of Ethan's upbringing to the other. The following week brought the first court appearance, a preliminary hearing to establish temporary arrangements while the guardianship was resolved. Alexander arrived to find Martha already seated with her attorney, her expression resolute. All this legal maneuvering, she whispered when he sat beside her. Is this what Thomas wanted? Before Alexander could respond, Ethan was led in by a court-appointed guardian ad litem. The boy's confusion at seeing his grandmother and uncle in this formal setting was evident. "Why are we in a courtroom?" he asked Martha. "Did someone do something wrong?" The innocence of the question silenced both adults. The guardian ad litem explained gently that the court was helping decide what was best for him. "But I already know." "What's best?" Ethan said with childish certainty. "Living with Grandma and having Uncle Alexander visit lots." The simplicity of his solution highlighted the absurdity of their legal battle. Outside the courtroom, during a recess, Alexander overheard Martha's attorney explaining the financial realities. "These proceedings will be expensive, Mrs. Wilson. Mr. Mercer has virtually unlimited resources for litigation." "I have something better," Martha replied firmly. "I have the truth of what's best for Ethan." Alexander walked away, the weight of the custody papers in his briefcase suddenly unbearable. He'd fallen back into old patterns, using financial advantage to overwhelm opposition rather than finding collaborative solutions. That evening, he visited Ethan's school uninvited, arriving during the boys' basketball practice. Martha confronted him in the hallway, her voice low but intense. "This isn't a corporate takeover, Alexander. This is a child's life." Looking past her to where Ethan played with his teammates, Alexander realized the truth of her words. He was approaching this problem with the wrong tools entirely. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing, Martha added softly. "He's forcing you to choose, really choose, what matters most." The Mercer Technologies boardroom fell silent as Alexander finished speaking. 12 executive faces stared back at him, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. To clarify, Davis, the CFO, finally said, "You're stepping down as CEO, effective immediately." "That's correct," Alexander confirmed, his voice steady despite the momentousness of his announcement. "Because of a family situation," Davis continued incredulously. "My nephew requires my attention," Alexander stated simply. "I can't give both him and this company what they deserve simultaneously." Caroline, seated to his right, studied him with an unreadable expression. She, alone among them, had witnessed his transformation over the past months, the missed meetings, the rescheduled calls, the photographs of a smiling boy that had appeared on his desk. "The succession plan we've discussed places Caroline as interim CEO," Alexander continued, "with a board-led search for a permanent replacement. I'll retain my position as chairman, but will be significantly less involved in day-to-day operations." The discussion erupted then. Questions about timing, market reactions, the ongoing vortex situation. Alexander answered each with the precision and clarity that had made him an exceptional CEO. Yet something had changed, a detachment from outcomes that would have been unthinkable months ago. Later, as executives filed out, Caroline remained behind. "You're really doing this," she said, not a question but a confirmation. "I am, because of the boy." Alexander considered this. "Because of what the boy has helped me understand." Caroline nodded slowly. "I never thought I'd see the day when Alexander Mercer chose family over the company." "Neither did I," he admitted. "Neither did Thomas." After Caroline left, Alexander sat alone in the boardroom, gazing at the Manhattan skyline that had been the backdrop to his ambition for so long. The view was the same, but the man observing it had fundamentally changed. That afternoon, Alexander did something he'd put off for 2 years. He visited Thomas's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the late autumn air crisp. Alexander stood before the simple headstone, unsure what to say to a brother who couldn't hear him. "You orchestrated quite the endgame," he finally began. "Using the company to force me back to family. Poetic justice, I suppose." The wind rustled through nearby trees, the only response. "I'm withdrawing the custody petition," Alexander continued. "Martha is Ethan's family too, the family who was there when I wasn't. I won't take him from her." He placed a hand on the cold stone. But I'm not walking away either. I've stepped down as CEO. The company will survive without me. I'm not sure I would have survived much longer with only the company." As he spoke the words aloud, Alexander recognized their truth. The emptiness of his existence before Ethan and Martha had entered it, the hollowness of success without connection. "I think this is what you wanted," he concluded. "Not to punish me, but to save me." Always the idealist, even from beyond. Alexander left a small model rocket, one he and Ethan had built together, leaning against the headstone before departing. Upon returning to his penthouse, Alexander made 2 calls. The first to Lawrence Harrington, instructing him to withdraw all custody claims immediately. The second to Martha, arranging to meet the following day to discuss a new approach. But when he arrived at Martha's apartment the next morning, he found it empty. No response to his knocks, no answer to his calls. Through the window he could see cleared shelves, missing photographs. A neighbor confirmed what he already feared. They left yesterday. The grandmother said it was a family emergency. Upstate, packed in quite a hurry. The words hit Alexander with physical force. Martha had fled with Ethan rather than continue the legal battle she believed she couldn't win. Despite his decision to withdraw his custody petition, he hadn't communicated. Clearly enough, she hadn't trusted him. Back in his car, Alexander stared at his phone. His first instinct was to call Harrington, to activate the legal machinery that could track them down through court orders and enforcement procedures. Instead, he called Caroline. "I need a few more days away," he told her. "A personal matter." "The board is meeting tomorrow to formalize the transition," she reminded him. "They'll have to do it without me," Alexander replied. "Family emergency." As he drove away from the empty apartment, Alexander reflected on the irony. He had finally chosen family over company, only to find that the family had chosen to escape from him. But if Thomas had taught him anything, it was that some things were worth pursuing beyond all business logic. Somewhere upstate, Martha and Ethan were hiding from the legal force they believed Alexander would unleash. He would find them, not to serve papers or assert rights, but to offer peace. For the first time in his life, Alexander Mercer was prepared to surrender rather than win. Alexander's first instinct was to hire investigators, the same efficiency-maximizing approach he applied to business problems. A few calls, sufficient resources applied, problem solved. But as he sat in his parked car outside Martha's empty apartment, he realized this wasn't a business problem. This was about trust, and trust couldn't be acquired through proxies. He scrolled through his phone to recent text messages with Ethan. The boy had mentioned his grandmother's sister lived way upstate where you can see all the stars. Not much to go on, but it was personal information, the kind investigators wouldn't have. An hour of searching public records yielded a possibility. Martha had a sister, Eleanor, in a small town called Riverside, 4 hours north of the city. It was the only lead Alexander had. He drove himself rather than calling his driver, the Aston Martin attracting curious glances as he left Manhattan behind. The further north he traveled, the more the landscape opened up, concrete giving way, to autumn-painted hills and scattered farmhouses. 2 hours into the journey, a sharp bang interrupted the engine's purr. The car lurched, then slowed despite Alexander's pressure on the accelerator. A rear tire shredded on roadside debris. Alexander pulled onto the shoulder and assessed the situation. The Aston Martin had no spare, a weight-saving design feature that now seemed remarkably impractical. His cell phone showed no service bars. Half a mile ahead stood a small gas station. Alexander locked the car and began walking, his Italian leather shoes inappropriate for the gravel shoulder. The indignity of the situation wasn't lost on him. A billionaire trudging along a rural highway, helpless without technology and staff. The gas station was a relic, manually operated pumps, a small attached garage with a hand-painted sign, Pete's Auto Repair. Inside, an older man in coveralls looked up from a newspaper. "Car trouble?" Alexander explained his situation, expecting immediate recognition of the Aston Martin's value and appropriate prioritization of his needs. Instead, Pete nodded slowly. Tow truck's out on another call. Won't be back for 3-4 hours. Can order you a specialty tire, but won't arrive till tomorrow earliest. That's unacceptable, Alexander replied automatically. I need to reach Riverside today. It's important. Family emergency? Pete asked, studying Alexander's expensive suit and frustrated expression. The question gave Alexander pause. Yes, he admitted. My nephew. Pete's expression softened. Riverside is still 30 miles north. No rental places around here? He considered for a moment. My daughter's heading that direction in about an hour. Delivers baked goods to the cafes up there. She might give you a ride, if you ask nice. The offer, a ride in a delivery van, was so far removed from Alexander's normal transportation options that he almost refused reflexively. But the image of Ethan and Martha, perhaps sitting down to dinner at Eleanor's house, made the decision for him. I would appreciate that very much, he said. Pete's daughter, Jenny, arrived shortly in a van painted with Sweet Connections Bakery. She eyed Alexander suspiciously as her father explained the situation. I charge for deliveries, she informed him bluntly. Gas money and time. Of course, Alexander agreed, reaching for his wallet. The next hour was unlike any experience in Alexander's adult life. Jenny chatted about local politics, her children's school activities, and the challenges of running a small business. She asked nothing about Alexander, seemingly uninterested in why a man in a bespoke suit was hitching a ride in her delivery van. Family's what matters, she said when he mentioned his nephew. My husband wanted to move to Albany for a better job, but my parents are here. Some things are worth more than money. The simple wisdom echoed Thomas's philosophy so precisely that Alexander fell silent. They passed a small commercial strip that had seen better days, empty storefronts with faded signs. Shame about downtown, Jenny commented. Used to be thriving. Before the big tech company moved out, they had an educational software office here, employed 30 local people, left 2 years ago when the founder died. Alexander's attention sharpened. Educational software? Something Mercer, Jenny recalled. Good people, sponsored the little league, donated computers to the school. Alexander's throat tightened. Ed Mercer, he supplied. My brother's company. Jenny glanced at him with new interest. You're that Mercer? I am, Alexander admitted. Huh. Jenny considered this as she drove. Your brother was well liked around here. People still talk about him. Another piece of Thomas's life Alexander had never known. His connection to this small community, his impact on people Alexander had never met. As they approached Riverside, Jenny pointed to a hillside neighborhood. If you're looking for Eleanor Wilson, she's up there, blue house with the big porch. Alexander thanked her, offering several $100s for the ride. Jenny took only 20. Use the rest to do something nice for your nephew, she suggested. That's what your brother would have done. Standing at the bottom of the hill, looking up at the blue house where his family might be waiting, Alexander realized he'd been given far more than a ride. Alexander climbed the steps to Eleanor Wilson's blue house, each footfall heavy with purpose. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal an older woman, Martha's sister unmistakably, with the same direct gaze but harder eyes. You found us faster than expected, she said flatly. I need to speak with Martha. Eleanor crossed her arms. She doesn't want to speak with you. It's important. Important enough to track down a woman and child who clearly wanted space, Eleanor challenged. Before Alexander could respond, Martha appeared behind her sister. It's all right. Ellie, I'll talk to him. Eleanor reluctantly stepped aside, her protective stance reminding Alexander of Thomas's description of their childhood, the Wilson sisters against the world. Martha led Alexander to the back porch, where rocking chairs faced a stunning view of the valley, The setting sun painted everything in amber light, a stark contrast to the tension between them. "How did you find us?" Martha asked. "Ethan mentioned your sister lived upstate where you could see the stars." Alexander gestured at the expansive sky above them. He wasn't exaggerating. "And you personally drove up here rather than sending lawyers?" Martha's tone was skeptical. "I came to tell you I've withdrawn the custody petition," Alexander said. "Directly. All of it. The legal battle is over." Martha's expression remained guarded. "Why?" "Because Thomas was right. And you were right." Alexander gazed out at the view. "This was never about legal rights or financial advantage. This was about what's best for Ethan. And you've suddenly determined that I'm what's best for him?" The doubt in Martha's voice was palpable. "I've determined that forcing him to choose between us serves no one, least of all Ethan." Alexander turned to face her fully. "I've stepped down as CEO of Mercer Technologies." This finally broke through Martha's composure. "You what?" "I resigned yesterday. I'll remain on the board, but the day-to-day operations will transition to others." Martha studied him, looking for deception. "Why would you do that?" "Because I can build another company. I can make more money." Alexander's voice softened. "But I can't get another brother, and Ethan can't get another childhood." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of children playing in a yard down the hill. "Thomas knew exactly what he was doing," Martha finally said, "setting conditions that would force you to choose between business and family, just as you once forced him to choose." Alexander nodded. "Poetic justice. And what exactly are you proposing now?" Martha asked. "A true compromise. No courts, no legal maneuvers. We create our own arrangement that puts Ethan first." Alexander leaned forward earnestly. "You remain his primary guardian. I'll be as involved as you'll allow me to be. The company shares go into a trust for Ethan's future, managed by both of us." Martha considered this. "And if I say no? If I want you to stay away entirely?" The question struck Alexander like a physical blow, but he answered honestly. "Then I'll respect your decision." Thomas would have wanted Ethan's stability prioritized over any legal claim I might have. Before Martha could respond, a door slammed and quick footsteps approached. "Uncle Alexander!" Ethan burst onto the porch, his face lighting up at the sight of his uncle. "You found us. Aunt Eleanor said you wouldn't, but I knew you would." The boy's unrestrained joy was a stark counterpoint to the tense adult conversation. Alexander found himself enveloped in a fierce hug that made speeches and legal arguments seem suddenly irrelevant. "Ethan, your uncle and I are having an important conversation," Martha began. "About me living with both of you?" Ethan asked directly. "I heard you and Aunt Eleanor talking," Martha sighed. "Ethan, it's complicated." "No, it's not," the boy insisted with childish certainty. "Dad always said family sticks together, even when it's hard." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I made this," he said, handing it to Alexander. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures holding hands in front of a house, a small boy between a grey-haired woman and a tall man in what appeared to be a suit. The simplicity of the image, Ethan's vision of his family, struck Alexander with unexpected force. Martha leaned over to see the drawing, her expression softening. "Ethan, honey, why don't you go help Aunt Eleanor with dinner?" she suggested gently. "Your uncle and I need to finish our talk." After Ethan reluctantly left, Martha turned back to Alexander. "He's already attached to you. That's what worried me most about the custody battle. He's lost so much already." "I'm not looking to take him from you," Alexander assured her. "I'm looking to give him something he deserves, his entire family working together. And when you get bored of playing, Uncle, when the novelty wears off and the business world calls you back." Martha's voice hardened again. "What then?" "That's not going to happen," Alexander said with quiet certainty. "You can't know that." "I can," he insisted, "because I know what emptiness feels like now. I lived it for years without recognizing it. I won't go back to that." Martha's gaze was searching, measuring his sincerity against her deep protective instinct for her grandson. From somewhere beyond the house, a child's voice called out, Ethan's voice, high with alarm. Both adults froze, then rushed toward the sound. "Ethan?" Martha called, fear edging her voice. "By the pond!" Eleanor's voice answered, equally urgent. They ran, following a path through pine trees to where a small pond reflected the deepening evening sky. Ethan was not in the water as Alexander had initially feared, but standing at the edge, staring into the trees beyond. "I saw a fox," he explained as they approached. "I wanted to follow it, but Aunt Eleanor said I had to wait for grown-ups." The mundane explanation deflated their panic, leaving only breathless relief. "You scared us," Martha scolded gently. "Sorry," Ethan replied. Not sounding particularly sorry, he looked between the adults. "Did you finish your important talk? Can Uncle Alexander stay for dinner?" Martha met Alexander's gaze over the boy's head, a silent communication passing between them. "Yes," she said finally. "Your uncle can stay for dinner. We have a lot to discuss." Dinner at Eleanor's house was a tentative truce. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrents, happily dominated the conversation with stories about the fox he'd seen and the stars he'd identified the previous night. Alexander observed the easy rhythm between the boy and the Wilson sisters, the gentle corrections, the inside jokes, the comfortable familiarity that only comes from daily life shared. After Ethan went to bed, the adults gathered in Eleanor's living room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows as Alexander outlined his proposal more formally. "I've drafted an agreement," he explained, opening his laptop. "It's not legal documents, just ideas for how we might structure." "This," Martha nodded cautiously. "I'm listening. First, you remain Ethan's primary guardian. Your home is his home." Alexander had thought carefully about this point, knowing it was non-negotiable for Martha. "I'd like regular visitation, weekends, some holidays, perhaps part of summer break." "And where would these visits occur?" Martha asked. "I'm looking at properties near your apartment in Queens," Alexander replied. "Something comfortable but not ostentatious, a place where Ethan can have his own room, feel at home." Martha's eyebrows rose. "You're moving to Queens?" "It makes sense," Alexander said simply. "My work is more flexible now, and it would minimize disruption for Ethan." Eleanor, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "And the company shares Thomas left? What happens to those?" "They go into a trust for Ethan, as Thomas intended. Martha and I would co-manage it until Ethan is old enough to take an interest if he chooses to." Alexander looked at Martha. "The educational software division was Thomas's passion. It should be preserved for his son." Martha studied Alexander's face. "You've thought this through?" "I have." "And the legal proceedings?" "Already terminated," Alexander confirmed. "I've instructed Harrington to withdraw everything. There will be no court battle." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney. In the momentary brightness, Alexander saw Martha's expression soften. "You really have changed," she said quietly. "Thomas made sure of that," Alexander replied. The next morning they explained the arrangement to Ethan over breakfast. The boy absorbed the information with surprising maturity, asking practical questions about where he would sleep and whether his rocket collection could be displayed in both homes. "So we'll be like a real family?" Ethan asked, looking between them. "Just in 2 houses instead of 1? "Yes," Martha assured him. "Your uncle will be part of your life now, properly part of it." Ethan considered this. Dad would be happy, he decided. He always talked about Uncle Alexander, even when he was sick. He said you were the smartest person he knew, but that you worked too hard. Alexander smiled sadly. "Your father was right about many things." During the drive back to the city, Martha and Ethan in Alexander's newly repaired car, following Eleanor's tearful farewell, Alexander broached another subject that had been forming in his mind. "I've been thinking about the storefront vacancies in Riverside," he said carefully, "the ones left when Ed Mercer relocated after Thomas died." Martha glanced at him. What about them? Ed Mercer could re-establish a presence there, create jobs. It would honor Thomas's commitment to the community. Martha considered this. That's actually a good idea. It would mean a lot to those people. Thomas cared about them. I'm learning that Thomas cared about many things I overlooked, Alexander admitted. In the back seat, Ethan had fallen asleep, his face peaceful. He has Thomas's expressions when he sleeps, Martha observed softly. And his determination, Alexander added, and his ability to see through people's defenses. They shared a smile, brief but genuine. The first of many such moments to come. Over the following weeks, their tentative arrangement solidified into something more substantial. Alexander found a brownstone 3 blocks from Martha's apartment. Elegant, but not extravagant. He worked remotely most days, attended board meetings virtually, and surprised everyone, including himself, by finding satisfaction in this new balance. The lawyers drafted a formal shared custody agreement, one that honored both Martha's role as primary guardian and Alexander's place in Ethan's life. The Ed Mercer shares were placed in trust, with provisions for Ethan's education and future, and plans for the company's return to Riverside were set in motion. One evening, as Alexander helped Ethan with homework at Martha's kitchen table, now a weekly ritual, Martha placed a legal document before him. I've signed it, she said simply. Alexander reviewed the custody agreement, noting her signature beside the space for his own. Are you sure? He asked. Martha glanced at Ethan, then back to Alexander. Thomas knew what he was doing, she said. He knew you needed family as much as Ethan needed you. Alexander signed the document, making official what had already become truth. They were, in their own unconventional way, a family. Later that night, as Alexander prepared to leave, Ethan hugged him tightly. See you Saturday for rocket launching? Wouldn't miss it, Alexander promised. Martha walked him to the door. This might actually work, she said, wonder in her voice. It will, Alexander replied, with the same certainty he'd once reserved for business predictions. Thomas made sure of it. 1 year later, Alexander stood in the kitchen of his Queen's brownstone, carefully arranging candles on a chocolate cake. Through the window he could see Ethan in the backyard, demonstrating his new telescope to school friends. Martha sat nearby, in a garden chair, supervising with the relaxed posture of someone who had found unexpected peace. Today was Thomas's birthday. They had decided to honor it as a family celebration, rather than a day of mourning, a choice Thomas himself would have appreciated. Need help with that? Caroline asked, entering the kitchen. Her visits had become more frequent as she'd transitioned from Alexander's executive assistant to Mercer Technologies' CEO. The company was thriving under her leadership, exceeding market expectations despite predictions of doom when Alexander stepped back. I think I can manage candles, Alexander replied dryly. Caroline smiled. Never thought I'd see Alexander Mercer fussing over birthday cake decorations. Life takes unexpected turns. Speaking of which, Caroline handed him an envelope. D. The board approved the Riverside expansion unanimously. We break ground on the new Ed Mercer facility next month. Alexander accepted the envelope, satisfaction warming him. The project would restore the jobs Thomas's community had lost and create new ones, focusing on educational technology for underserved schools. Thomas's original vision finally realized. He would have loved this, Alexander said quietly. Yes, Caroline agreed, understanding immediately who he meant. And I think he would have been proud of you. The doorbell rang, announcing more guests. Alexander had kept his promise to maintain a simpler life, but some connections remained. Jack Winters, whose investigation had first led him to Ethan. Jenny from the bakery in Riverside, whose delivery van ride had taught him more than any executive retreat, and a few others who bridged his old and new lives. Martha entered through the back door, carrying empty lemonade glasses. The past year, had softened the edges of their relationship, mutual respect evolving gradually into genuine friendship. "Ethan's friends are getting hungry," she reported. "Should we serve dinner soon?" "Almost ready," Alexander confirmed. Martha paused, studying. "The cake. Thomas would have approved of chocolate. It was his favorite." "I remember," Alexander said. "He used to trade his entire lunch for my chocolate pudding cups in elementary school." They shared a smile at the memory, something that happened more frequently now, remembering Thomas with joy rather than regret. The evening unfolded with an easy warmth that still occasionally surprised Alexander. Children's laughter, casual conversation, no business calls or market updates interrupting the flow. His phone remained silent in his pocket, and he felt no urge to check it. After dinner, as dusk settled, Alexander gathered everyone in the backyard. Ethan had helped him set up a simple memorial, a small garden stone engraved with Thomas's name beside a newly planted oak tree. "Today we're celebrating my brother's birthday," Alexander began, his voice steady. "Thomas valued family above all else. He would be happy to see us together like this." Ethan stepped forward, placing a small model rocket, like the one Alexander had left at the grave, beside the stone. "To Dad," he said simply. They shared stories as stars appeared overhead, Martha recounting Thomas's terrible singing voice, Alexander describing their first computer program, a primitive Space Invaders game, Ethan proudly explaining how his father had taught him to ride a bike in a single afternoon. Later, as guests departed and Ethan reluctantly went to bed, Alexander found himself alone with Martha on the back porch, the night air cool around them. "It's been quite a year," Martha observed. "Indeed," Alexander agreed. "You've kept your word," she said, "about being present, about putting Ethan first." "It wasn't as difficult as I expected," Alexander admitted. "Once I understood what mattered," Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Thomas always said you'd figure it out eventually. He never gave up on you, even when you'd given up on each other." Alexander thought about the man he'd been a year ago, isolated in success, insulated by wealth, unaware of the emptiness at his core. "I've been thinking about opening a small bakery," Martha said, changing the subject. "Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place. I've always loved baking." "That sounds wonderful," Alexander encouraged. "I know a good location not far from here." "I'd need a small business loan," Martha continued. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Alexander recognized her independence, still maintaining boundaries, still ensuring their relationship remained balanced. "I know an excellent small business banker," he offered, respecting her approach. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies illuminate the garden. On Martha's phone, a notification chimed. "Ethan's. School announcing upcoming parent-teacher conferences. Tuesday at 3, Martha read. "Can you make it?" "I know the board meets on Tuesdays." "I'll be there," Alexander promised without hesitation. "The board can wait." Later that night, after Martha and Ethan had gone home to their apartment, their routine, a comfortable alternation between the two households, Alexander found himself alone in his study. On his desk sat two framed photographs, the old one of him and Thomas at graduation, and a new one taken earlier that day. Alexander, Martha, and Ethan smiling beneath the oak tree. Family, Thomas had tried to tell him, was the true fortune. It had taken tragedy and an 8-year-old boy's name tag to make Alexander understand. He placed the two photos side by side, the past and present in harmony at last, and switched off the light.